You're welcome and deserving. Have a wonderful show.
Thanks. So welcome everybody to the second hour of Mindshifters Radio. Today is Monday, February the 19th, 2024. And our calling number is 563-999-3581. And press 1, and that puts you into queue to talk to us. And we'd love to hear your comments and questions because that makes this your show. And we'll give, oh, there he is. I started to say give Michael a moment to dial in, but he is with us.
I be here. Welcome. I got in the first time today.
Good. Well, welcome.
Yeah. Well, welcome, everybody. Delighted that you're here. And that we go to the next level of moving the mind out of the way and stepping into truth, a la first century Aramaic Yeshua, and understanding the words of his first century Aramaic teachings. So, bottom line, that's what we're working on. That's what we're here to do, is to really comprehend those teachings and to, through the work with them, to build the brain cells, to develop the brain cells, to be out of our minds when it's time to be out of our minds, and to have a mind that supports accurate content when it's time to make use of our minds. So that's kind of basically what we're here to do. That's the work we're here to do. So, Miss Jeannie, do we have any questions from the app or in the chat room, or anybody with a hand up before we get started?
I will go to my other email. I think that I looked and we've answered all of them, but I will double check. Nobody has a hand up. Nope, we've answered all the questions.
Awesome. Cool. Well, then I'm going to just pick up a little bit of where we left off on Friday, just to have the continuity. And, you know, we're in a conversation with Yeshua. We're working right now on the Enlightenment book, and we've veered off into one of the products of the Enlightenment work, which is the book, The End of Suffering, and how to be working through the blocks in the mind. And Yeshua says to the character in the book, do you recall how often and how many ways I said, why do you not understand my speech? Even because you cannot hear my word. And then he explains what he means. He says the mind structured in the ways of the world, you'll notice in the scriptures there are two minds that are spoken about there. There's the mind of man, or the world mind, and then there's what was called the mind of Christ. Now, in Aramaic, you need to understand that the word Christ is not a proper name. It is not the name of a man. It is the name of an office. You know, in the same way as if I ran for mayor tomorrow and won the election, you wouldn't call me, or you might call me Mayor Michael, but that wouldn't mean mayor was part of my name. It would be the office that I occupy. And so the word Christ is an office. And remember, Paul talks about it's the mind of Christ in you. It's the mind when you move into that office, that's your hope. That's what will clean things up. So we have this mind structured in the ways of the world, and if you don't have the eyes to see what is happening in the actuality, then your mind substitutes the pictures that it holds. And it substitutes those pictures, so one mind substituting its content for an experience, a direct experience of the actuality. So Yeshua goes on to explain, the mind structured in the ways of the world cannot actually perceive the intended meaning of my words because it can't see past its own content. It cannot produce realities that do not match what it thinks it already knows. It is waxed gross. So he's introducing a term here from the ancient scriptures, waxed gross, and then he defines what waxed gross means, and that is hypnotized by its own internal meanings. There is much to give up, he says, to make room for the understanding of my work, to be able to perceive me truly and accomplish what I did. to even hear me. By giving up, I do not mean sacrifice, but release of the untrue. The misunderstandings, the hostilities, the fears, the behaviors in your life that only appear to work for you. So ultimately what he's saying is you've got to disable the fear-based mind. You remember how many times he speaks about fear not, fear not, fear not, and yet there are those who will pretend to be speaking in his names that will tell you that fear is the beginning of wisdom, fear of the Creator. So let's see if we can make this straight. So fear of love is where your wisdom starts. No, I'd say that's where the dumbing down of the mind happens. So the idea is to disable the fear-based mind, to forgive as to any form of fear that there is within you. So this giving up that I'm speaking about does not mean a loss, but rather one that brings gain because it makes room for the blessings the truth brings. Now, it's not for the faint-hearted to move from a culture that lives in a language of, you made me angry, you made me sad, you made me afraid. But what we're ultimately saying is it's time to step up to the plate and take responsibility for what's going on inside of you. If you're angry, then know that there is an energetic pattern in you that doesn't belong in you. And in the Aramaic sense, that would be called sin. Remember, the Aramaic term, sin, is simply an archery term. If you fired at the bullseye on the archery range and you missed that bullseye, the scorekeeper would yell sin. All the word means is off the mark. You know, over the last 40-some years of working with the Aramaic, probably the most common feedback I get when I meet somebody that, maybe I haven't seen them in 20 years, maybe they haven't been in a workshop in 30 years, and I'll say that one thing I remember that's changed my life so much is that sin, it just means off the mark. We actually were having that conversation with Arya this morning and talking about how energies that are off the mark, things that don't belong in the structure or in this system, are sin. Nothing to do with morals or any, somebody in a low moral standing might engage in energies that are off the mark more often than one who doesn't. But the idea is to bring the mind up to standard with energetic patterns that belong. So notice, he says, there are those who promote victimhood as though it's a virtue and make it appear as though my work, my life, and my pathway to the Creator were suffering and sacrifice. Nothing could be further from the truth. My pathway to the Creator was clearly love, but the world mind, glued to its woes, uses the idea that my crucifixion and death were about suffering and sacrifice to justify clinging to an ancient misperception of a punishing, wrathful Creator. A Creator that could only be appeased by the blood of his own Son. I demonstrated a principle and truth worlds apart from that. A truth that the world mind has not yet gained comprehension of in the last 2,000 years. So Yeshua came to demonstrate, and you remember when we started this conversation, the name of this book originally was The 11 Most Important Words Ever Spoken, and that Yeshua was laying out a protocol for having a mind that could comprehend what he taught, how a mind lives in truth. So Yeshua came to demonstrate this protocol in a behavioral fashion. He didn't come to, tell us about the excellence and benefits of suffering. I've been cast, he says, by the world mind as the king of victims, but I never played such a role. I had no intention of making it look like suffering was the way to God. My message, interpreted through a cultural mindset of victimhood and fleshed out by those who are lost in their own unresolved pain, was turned up inside out. It was a totally incorrect interpretation of what I intended. What I did wherever I saw suffering was to presence the love of God and thereby quickly dissolve and bring that suffering to an end. I brought healing. Give me a second here. I'm just making a note. So I brought healing and came to teach you the same. So remember, the title of our book is The End of Suffering, not the excellence of suffering. I never said a word in praise of suffering. I did not allow suffering to carry on 1 second past people's willingness to heal. If you look carefully into your scriptures at my meaning for the word suffer, you will see that I used it primarily to mean to permit or to allow. So he offers a quote where he said, "Suffer the little children to come unto me and forbid them not." And you notice there's a whole theology that's built on a different interpretation of that word. On the 2 occasions when I mentioned sacrifice, I was very clear that that was not what the Creator wanted. I said, "But go ye and learn what that means. I will have mercy and not sacrifice." How could someone think they were following me and build a dogma based on sacrifice? Only one waxed gross, trapped in the world mind and so focused on victimhood that they could not hear my words. I said in plain Aramaic, learn mercy and forget sacrifice, yet they still wanted sacrifice, could only think in terms of sacrifice because they were enslaved to it. And sadly, still are. That's what filled their minds. That was all they had the ears to hear. And this concept of being waxed gross is a really important concept to understand. Their minds were waxed gross in sacrifice. Listen once again to what Isaiah said about this being waxed gross and what it would do to a man or woman. Waxed gross means that in hearing ye shall hear, and shall not understand, and seeing you shall see, but shall not perceive. Their ears are dull of hearing, and their eyes they have closed, lest at any time they should see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and should understand with their heart. What do you suppose the alternative to a mind waxed gross is? Remember the first condition, Rahma. Many think that they understand this idea of being waxed gross. It is a state of being deaf and blind to even a simple truth, simply stated. I said, and I want to quote Daddy Bush, read my lips. I said, no sacrifice, period. Now, you know, there are all kinds of people in the field of churchianity that do sacrifice over and over. I mean, in the Middle Ages, there were people who took whips and they put pieces of metal on the rawhide and they whipped themselves until they bled so that they could suffer. Remember, he says, the human mind can only think in terms of its own content. To change your mind's content so that it can just consistently produce realities based in love and a different reality for what happened the day of the crucifixion requires inner work. I came to give humanity the tools with which to change its mind, the tools with which to do their work and see differently. Will you do the inner work required to open and, quote, see with your eyes and hear with your ears and understand with your heart? Or will you remain wax gross with fear and hostility? Rest assured that if you have suffering, fear, or hostility in any form in your life, your heart is wax gross and you are not yet hearing my words. To quote-unquote understand with your heart is not an easy thing, for you must let go of your mind's interpretations long enough to grasp truth. And you must be willing to be out of your mind. Of course, I want to, but how is such a thing achieved? Is it really possible in such an insane world as ours? The wars, the rumors of wars, the violence in our world causes fear in everyone, and we have to be tough and ready to fight for what's right. Yeshua says, that is your mind wax gross in fear and violence. But this love stuff got you killed. Yes, but if you notice, they couldn't keep me that way. The insane world is not the cause of your hostility and fear, but the reverse is true. Your hostility and fear cause you to produce an insane world, or see an insane world where, in truth, reason exists. Character says to him, I don't see the logic in that. He asks the question, have you ever stood in front of someone and acted reasonable, sane, and even perhaps loving, and had them accuse you of all sorts of bizarre, off-the-wall things, and had your accuser go a little or maybe even a lot crazy? And then, to add insult to injury, they claim it was your fault and that they were your innocent victim? Well, actually, yes, too often. So you stood in a loving, sane space and they accused you of being the crazy one. Yes, been there, done that. So their hostility or fear caused them, with no provocation, at least no external provocation, to produce in their minds what looked like an insane world. Thinking that what is happening inside one's own mind belongs to someone else is the true definition of insanity. And without the tools to manage the output of the mind, one will remain insane, no matter where they are in the echelons of power. It has been said that the Creator could only be satisfied by the sacrifice of His Son, by my death. That was certainly not my teaching. Whose do you suppose it was? The world mind, waxed gross, that is, filled with the belief in the heathen ritual of blood sacrifice, was and is deaf to my instructions. How clearly does it have to be said? What has become a cornerstone of faith in me for many is in direct opposition to my words. How blatant does the disregard for my teaching have to be before people wake up from the slumber of induced fear implanted by those who had controlled them and did not understand? I said, but if you had known what this meaneth, I will have mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. The interpreters of my words are all dead. I am alive. I said, the things I do, you too can do. Do you think they heard me? Without the eyes to see and the ears to hear? Who could hear the truth of my demonstration? Who could see what I was actually doing? I came into a world where suffering and victimhood was the norm, and purposely chose what appeared to be the worst affliction available to show how I could not be touched by it. The world mind misinterpreted my message and focused on suffering. It was incapable of living out of the protocol I said was necessary. and therefore it rendered them incapable of understanding. There are those who will say that the Greek is the original language of the Scriptures. If that's true, why do even the Greek scholars admit that Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani was left in the original Aramaic? Why have my Aramaic roots been covered up? Who stands to benefit? Do you have any idea what I actually said? Or better yet, what I meant? Greek renditions of my life and teachings have portrayed aspects of the crucifixion of my life totally inaccurately, and many of the fine points of my teaching have been clouded and hidden. And actually, I'm going to change that one word from many to most. A falsification has taken place in the key words I said on the cross. My thoughts were displaced in the Greek translation by ideas that never entered my mind. My thoughts were displaced in minds that were waxed gross. Give me a second, I'll make a note here. I had set this book aside, and I'm seeing as I'm doing this that I really need to get back to it. I said nothing during the crucifixion that portrays suffering. I said, behold, I make all things new, and it is currently presented. I certainly did not speak of being forsaken by my Father, by our Father. I developed a refined form of forgiveness designed to free people from suffering. I taught, practiced, and demonstrated the effectiveness of that tool, but a backward interpretation of the crucifixion turned my mission upside down. Make room in your mind to grasp my words in their original context, and you will begin to see what I did and its potential meaning to humanity that is so locked in victimhood that it seems to be the only way, in fact, a desirable way to live. Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani was my statement of thanksgiving and an expression of my excitement at the insight I had gained through what appeared to others to have been the last days of my life. Well, what did those words, Eli, I'm not even sure how to pronounce it. What did they mean, I asked? If I told you, do you think you have the ears to hear it? Do you think you are developed enough spiritually to actually make sense of why I would be in celebration while hanging on a cross, crowned in thorns? It's time to rethink everything you think you know about me, because to a great degree you've been taught an inferior, heathen philosophical system in place of my instructions, which are only meaningful when understood in their original context. I came to put an end to suffering, not to promote it as a pathway to God. I intended to show that suffering has no effect on those who freed themselves from victimhood. I demonstrated that life delivers circumstances to make it look like suffering is the only option, but instead of suffering, I held to the mind of love in the presence of my enemies. And he puts that word enemies in quotes. In your world of hostility, national and interpersonal war, and religious prejudice, who is ready? Who had the ears to hear that instruction? I established through demonstration what was possible for every human being. Each experience that seems to demand suffering is nothing more than an opportunity to free ourselves from the burden of that particular form of suffering, which comes from our own minds. And the tool for gaining that freedom is forgiveness. I did not suffer because I healed my mind's ability to inflict suffering on myself. In such an experience, you must forgive, which is to remove that particular aspect of suffering from your body's mind, and therefore end even the possibility of experiencing that form of suffering again. The world mind, trapped in its own stresses because of the lack of the presence of love in their lives, believes everyone else is to blame for the conditions in which one finds themselves and for the realities it experiences. Wanting to appear religious, it then counsels forgiveness, but substitutes the idea of pardoning in place of what I taught about forgiveness. It piously suggests you let others off the hook for your suffering, that which you've inflicted upon yourself. Excuse me, I'm making a note. This so-called forgiveness does nothing to change the source of the suffering which is within. I counseled, from your hearts forgive. This was not a bleeding heart statement, not a sentimental nice guy, let them off the hook directed, as it's been interpreted. The word heart in my native Aramaic is the equivalent of your word unconscious. I was saying, in effect, you must go into your own pain, though you've blamed another for it. Your pain comes out of what you've denied and suppressed in yourself. And while your brother triggers that pain in you, what you're feeling is your own, and you must remove from the depths of your unconscious, your heart, the wrongs you think belong to your brother. Humanity has spent centuries misunderstanding this most important principle and misusing forgiveness. Instead of each doing his or her own inner work, and thereby disabling the mind's ability to even produce suffering in any form, most turn their attention to everyone else's mistakes, as if their pain would go away if only someone else would change. Do you hear how ridiculous it is to, quote-unquote, forgive others for what's internally produced? Once again, my instructions have been ignored. I said, why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, but perceivest not the beam that is in thine own eye? Why do you live in blockage of truth? If you actually practice forgiveness as I taught it, if you utilize it to change the painful realities in your own mind first, the result will be the life of serenity I taught was possible. But you must use the tool as I presented it. And it has nothing to do with letting others off the hook for what's going on inside of you. Change the painful realities in your own mind first, and the result will be a life of serenity I taught was possible. Truly, you will then be able to say, with me, I am not of this world. To experience this, one must follow my directive that said, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself. That is, deny his own insane mind. Take up his cross and follow me. Notice I suggested you take up your cross, not mine. If you've taken up your cross and followed me, and life delivers circumstances that make it look like suffering is the only option, then because you have forgiven, that is, removed every reality of suffering, there will simply be no capacity left to suffer in you. Anger, fear, and all of its accompanying insanities will disappear. Vengeance, one of the byproducts of projected suffering, will also dissipate. And instead of suffering as the world mind would, you will love and support. You will be literally the space of active love, even for your quote-unquote enemies, because it is your highest nature to do so. That's what I demonstrated. That's why they couldn't kill me. Not because of the excellence of suffering. In your world of hostility, who understood why I healed my adversary, the high priest's servant, instead of attacking like Peter did? Peter's mind was waxed growth with fear, defensiveness, and attack, attributes of the world mind. He, like the others, did not understand my mission and tried to protect me from the triumph of my life. He was still trapped after 3 years of personal instruction by me in the world mind. With absolute clarity and confidence, I went through the worst nightmare a human can imagine and came out the other side unscathed. I simply carried on my work. I established through demonstration what was possible for a human being. I truly have set before you an open door, and no man can shut it. With it, the open door to eternal joy, youth, and life, you will experience what others called heaven, where others experience only hell. It is the key to unlocking the secrets of and putting an end to words that hold a message that was never understood. My words provided a reason to end suffering in a world that only knew how to perpetrate it. He shook his head in disbelief. The old ways could only think in terms of suffering and retribution. All that insanity after I told them, you have heard that it hath been said, thou shalt be the space of love for thy neighbor, and hate thine enemy. But I say unto you, have Rachma for your enemies. Be space of active love, and bless those that curse you. Do good to those that hate you. And be the space of love for those who despitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be the reflection over the children of your Father, which is the community of love in which you were designed to live. He maketh that presence of love, the sun, to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth the rain to the just and the unjust. Note carefully the instruction I gave here and the result it would produce if it was followed. If you wish to stand in the world as the offspring of the Creator, rather than the offspring of the world mind, you must be the space of active love. You must recognize yourself as love and reflect that into the world. Holding the space for enemies and those that curse you. This is the key to sanity, because each energy you engage in produces so-called chemistry in your body. This is the pathway that must be learned and traveled to follow me. And in it, there is no room for discrimination, hostility, fear, crusades, wars, or inquisitions. If your disdain, your condemnation, etc., is aimed at self or another, you're out of harmony. Well, I replied to him, that's certainly clear, but who could live up to such a standard? Only those who understood my teachings as I meant them and embodied the protocol I gave them. Only those who faced the lower nature in themselves and done the inner work as I taught it. It was a work difficult to grasp even for the average person who heard me speak in my native language. It was a work unspeakable and incomprehensible in the Greek. That is why so many atrocities have been done by those who seem to be my followers. One with a stormy personality who did not understand the protocol and the tools I laid out twists my words and brings their violent behaviors to what seem to be my teachings, appearing to be my followers because they mimic my words. They have no comprehension of my actual teachings and rationalize the substitution of their behaviors for mine, doing their insanities in my name. Of course, those insanities had to do with their human propensities, not my teachings nor the church. Even as you apply the tools I demonstrated, taming your violent, critical inclinations, you will encounter an experience of being that which has not even been imagined by most humans. I offer him the thought, I've always wondered how so-called Christian nations could go to war. And in more than one occasion, I've had someone tell me their minister or priest told them it was their duty to go to war and kill for the country. And when I think of that, it puzzles me every time. They could only misinterpret the simple, clear directive I gave because their minds were waxed gross. Their old beliefs making a note here. Their old beliefs were rooted much deeper than my teaching. Their actions, reinforced by repeated engagement, were vested in fear, violence, suffering, and retribution. Reinforced by the expectations of the world mind that kills and imprisons those who do not go along with its violence and vengeance. Those beliefs out from the past and the behaviors they prompted seemed necessary to protect them in a fierce conflict and poverty-ridden world. However, while a threatening response to anything may bear the fruit of protection, it prevents the experience of existence. Existence as the presence of love. I not only pointed them toward it, but demonstrated it. And they could not understand because their minds were wax gross. In order to miss my core message, voices from the past, louder in their minds than the higher truth I attempted to give them, ran their lives. Thus my words became seeds, just seeds. Or to many they were nice words, often repeated, but behavior is always based on the loudest voice in one's mind. Within a hostility and fear-based mind, my words are impossible to live by. To hear and act on truth, one must open this filter I spoke of called Rakma and nurture truth more than their current realities, past beliefs, and past ways of expressing. The only reflection of the honoring of truth is the ability to live it. Where love is not expressed in behavior, it in fact does not exist. Love cannot abuse verbally, physically, mentally, or emotionally. Where the inability to live a truth exists, it reflects attachment to a false god. When I said, "He that believeth on me is not condemned," I meant the false gods like fear and guilt must be given up, and relationship with love must be maintained as I taught. In so doing, the destruction wrought by those false gods would be avoided, hence release from condemnation, the equivalent of what people called salvation. To believe is to be living. When I said to Peter, after leaving the Garden of Gethsemane, "Get thee behind me, Satan, thou art an offense to me, for thou savorest not the things that be of God, but those that be of men," I gave a definition of Satan. The reason my work has been left untried is that each must face in themselves everything in their past that removes the awareness of the presence of the love of God and therefore inhibits the ability to live that first law. It's a challenging piece of work that I brought for each one to do. To hear and act on the truth, you must first honor truth more than your own past. Honoring the past more than the truth, even if that truth could bring enormous benefits, again, was called wax growth, or also called hardness of the heart. It is difficult, if not impossible, to hear through a hardened heart. The protocol, the first law I gave, is a way to bypass a hardened heart. Spiritual leaders whose hearts been hardened will superimpose their fears and hostilities onto my teaching, then use them to control. Beware, they and parts of the religious and political system may want, once again, to crucify me or you, because my true teachings liberate people and put them into direct relationship with love instead of making them cower in fear before some human authority. The Creator is love, and one that dwelleth in love dwelleth in the Creator, and the Creator in him or her. Fear is the absence of the active love of God. Fear defiles and destroys the human temple. It has no place in you. Your temple is certainly not designed to be a home for fear. And hostility, it will destroy your temple. My heart leapt into my throat. With all the study I'd done, how could I have not been taught that there was a protocol, a prerequisite, as it were, for reading the Scriptures? My head spun in 1,000 directions, wondering all my life I wanted truth more than anything. How could I have missed something so important as the first step? An old terror that I'd learned in the church since childhood began to stir in my mind. I hesitated to ask, wanting to hide my ignorance, but finally I blurted out, "What are you talking about? What do you mean?" A lawyer once asked me, he says, what the greatest commandment of the law was, and my answer, I put the key to reading the Scriptures in a way that reflected their intended meanings and ultimately the key to life itself. Do you remember my answer to him? I repeated the answer 1,000 times in my work and said, you said you shall maintain Rachma love for the Creator with your entire mind, with your whole nafsha, and with all your actions and in all your thoughts. This is the greatest commandment. Yeah, I know it by heart. It takes precedence over all. And the second, which is like unto it, you shall maintain Rachma love in your mind for your neighbor as for your nafsha, and thereby maintaining yourself. I felt like a school kid being quizzed, and I thought I'd passed. In this instruction, I gave you the tools with which to govern your mind. I was, in effect, telling you how to keep it on track and, therefore, be in charge of your own life. Rest assured, if you don't know how to govern your mind for yourself, someone else will show up and take over both your mind and your life. This has always been the plight of the poor, the ignorant, and the suffering masses. Those who live off them do not want truth in people's hands, because when you, quote unquote, know the truth shall make you free. As a result, people have been taught to subtly reject or superficially embrace what I said as religious. My work is not religious in the traditional sense. It's the pathway to liberty and truly living. My intention is to educate as to the laws that govern how life works, the laws of living. Living out of full knowledge of these laws is true religion. The human mind can justify and rationalize anything it wants to or decides to do or believe without knowing and following the rules to keep that mind on track. Once it decides, the only evidence that it feeds is the evidence that will support the decision. That's all that can be seen in the mind. The mind is capable of blocking truth totally, and when it does, no matter how obvious a particular fact is, if it's inconsistent with the mind's decisions, that fact becomes invisible. The mind will provide itself all the documentation it needs to make its conclusions justifiable, rational, and reasonable. The solution to this blockage of truth is honoring truth and following the protocol I laid out. And we're down to about 10 minutes now. And so I'm going to just check in with our listeners. Miss Jeannie, do we have anything happening in the chat room? Or anybody with a hand up in the phone queue? If you're out there with a question and you're on one of those stations where we can't see you in our control panel, if you dial the phone number 563-999-3581, you'll be listening to the show directly. And then if you push 1, that will raise a hand, and Miss Jeannie will know that you want to talk to us and introduce you.
It is all quiet on this end. If somebody hits 1, you're first in line. We got 9 minutes.
So if you're out there in listener land and you have a thought for us, push 1. Is this making sense? Is this fitting for how to develop a mindset that can support what Yeshua was actually teaching? Anyone with a question, a thought? Anyone who is working on an issue where you need some support, perhaps with the forgiveness tool, perhaps with the communication tool? I was working with someone earlier today that about 2 months ago began or took on the assignment to do some responsibility communication with a person that they were doing business with that had just aroused all kinds of crazy in them. And through probably 10 conversations, just mind raging, railing, just, but each day doing a little more work on it. And today finally shared with me on the phone, actually as I was driving back from doing some errands, shared with me a responsibility communication that was just void of emotion, void of pain, void of trauma. I mean, it took about 2 months, but a simple statement of, oh, here's what I'm seeing. The shift and the change that happens is possible. It takes time. It takes work. It doesn't happen overnight. The tools are about how to achieve the result, how to bring the result around in your own mind and restore you from a mind waxed gross, which, doesn't, for most people, make any sense. What do you mean a mind waxed gross? Hopefully you've got the brain cells for that now, and you can see that if your mind is constructing perceptions based in hostility or fear and placing those in front of your experience of yourself as love, inhibiting you from experiencing the actuality, creating a substitution, then you've got difficulty. Use the tools, and that whole circumstance and situation's changed. So, Miss Jeannie, you've got somebody with a hand up. Let's say hello.
I do. It's area code 903. You're on the air. Who do we have?
Greetings. My name is Rome. How are you all doing today?
Doing well, Rome. Welcome. Glad to hear your voice. How can we support you? Is this making sense for you?
This is making sense, and this is the first time I've called in. I got to say I'm thoroughly pleased to hear you on the radio, seeing that up until maybe a week ago or so, I looked you up on YouTube, found the website, and saw that you're still at it. So that's awesome. I think
we're still at it.
I had seen your video from, I don't know, why is this happening to me again? I don't know, 80s, 90s, early 90s, I'm not sure.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I think it's awesome. I saw yesterday that you all do the radio station Monday through Friday, so I figured I'd jump in here. And, I can say a lot, although I'll save the line for, someone else that comes along. But I think it's very beneficial getting into, the scriptures and peeling back the layers. I'm ecstatic to stay with you all alongside that, though I will say, as the first-time listener calling in and loving the direction of your work, not exactly tuned in finally to where you all are presently in the scriptures,
Right.
but more so in light of me discovering where you are currently, where would you say that where would you suggest that I start? Just trying to get plugged in and caught up to speed.
Okay. Hear you. First of all, let me just say that, Rome, you hold the record now. If we go back into the 80s, that's almost 40 years ago, and I often hear from people 10, 15 years, 20 years. You're the first person that's tapped in. Well, I heard you 40 years ago, and now it's time to get rocking. So I'm delighted to hear your voice. And basically what we're doing right now, we started a study about 16 or 17 radio shows ago, Jeannie, where we're looking at a book called Enlightenment, which we publish based in the Cabour's manuscript. The Cabour's
26.
is, are we up to 26 already? Oh, wow. Almost a month of, anyway, we started with that, and Jeannie has a special page on the website with links and this would be a good starting point, that you could go back to day one of that study, and basically what we're doing is working through this book Enlightenment, which is what we've published so far from the Cabour's manuscript. And part of that, basically what I'm working to do, is to lay a foundation for people to be able to bring a mindset that would be the Aramaic mindset to these teachings, where most people bring a Greek mindset, and as we've been talking about, those minds are wax gross. And so you might want to today, if you go to the notes, if you go to our website, whyagain.org, you'll see a microphone in the middle of the page. If you click on that microphone and drill down, there'll be a set of notes that go with the show today, and there'll be a link in there to the page where all the archives are of the last 26 days. So you might want to go back and start with day one. Also, we have the world's only
Rome, if you
forgiveness
receive
app.
text, I just texted you the direct link to the Enlightenment Archives.
Oh, thank you so much.
On it. So on it.
I did receive that. Thank you. Awesome.
So you might want to start there. You might want to go to your app store on your phone and type in the words Heartland, Heartland, Aramaic forgiveness. The Why Is This Happening to Me Again workshop that you did back 40 years or so years ago, there's a worksheet, if you remember, that we presented in that. So the app has two different versions of the worksheet, and a children's app, or a children's game called the Dragon Klingon game, for adults to begin to work through the process of forgiveness, and then the worksheets are there that you can actually do on the phone. So you could do that, and or go to the website, download the worksheets, print them off, and start to key into the forgiveness process. If you go to our YouTube channel, there are dozens of videos there. One of the main ones you might want to step into next would be a refresher on Why Is This Happening to Me Again. So if you go to YouTube and just type in Michael Rice, you'll find our channel, MichaelRyce, and look for Why Is This Happening to Me Again. The latest Why workshop I did, I think it was last June. It's about, I think it's 2 hours and 40 minutes or so. And that'll bring you up to speed on most of what I've learned from when you heard the workshop originally. Back then I was teaching forgiveness, had been teaching it for several years, but didn't know why or how it worked, just knew that it worked. So in that latest rendition of Why Is This Happening to Me Again, in my 40 years of study since we connected previously, I've learned why and how you would do such a silly thing as what the Aramaic forgiveness process tells you to do. So it lays that whole thing out and goes through the worksheet process. There are at least 20 different radio show links on the website where we go through the forgiveness process. There's also over 5,000 hours of archives of this radio show that you can access free as well. So lots of resources there.
Well, thank you so much for all of that. Thank you all for all that you do. I see the time is now 2. So
we are right on the cusp of it, yes.
Okay.
All right.
Well, I'll leave it at that. Thank you for your time, and I'll look forward to connecting with you soon.
Delighted, and really glad to hear your voice. Where are you located, Rome?
I'm in East Texas.
Oh, okay. Cool. Well, holding the space, and I'll look forward to future communication and seeing what unfolds for both of us.
All right. Sounds great.
All right. Blessings. Take care. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Have the best year yet of your eternal life. It's an awesome gift to give